Welcome to Advancing the Diaconate, a series devoted to highlighting the work of deacons and their ministries in the world and the church. Now, here's your host.
And hello again, everyone. I'm Deacon John Ray. I am a deacon in the Diocese of Atlanta, and I am honored to have you back with us for this continuing series called Advancing the Diaconate. And speaking of welcoming, I'm about to welcome Deacon Connie Campbell-Pearson. Connie is a deacon in the Diocese of Montana. Connie, welcome.
Hi, John.
I'm so
glad
delighted
to be here with you.
And I couldn't be more delighted to have you. Thank you for coming on to talk about you and your journey and your story.
Love to.
So let's give everyone a little background on you and your journey. Give everyone an introduction to who Deacon Connie Campbell-Pearson is all about.
I've had somewhat of a circuitous journey. I was actually ordained to the diaconate in 2014. And before that, in some other life, I was an RN. I was in the Peace Corps. I bounced around in a variety of churches and finally found the Episcopal Church. Thank you, Jesus. And once I found that, I knew I was in the right place. I hadn't even been confirmed before I was in the school for deacons, and the bishop said, "You're going to have to wait at least a year to tell me if you really want to be a deacon or not." But, I went to a triennium in Chicago with the archdeacon, who was Roxy Klingensmith, who's now my wife. And when I got to that triennium in Chicago in 2009, I saw deacons and I said, that's what I am. And they had ministries that they were posting and showing, and it changed my life, that trip to Chicago. So that's when I entered the diaconate, and I have not regretted it for 1 second.
Wow. Can we dive into that in terms of
Sure.
what you saw when you saw those deacons? What was it that stood out for you?
Well, one of them was a presentation about a water project that had happened down in Louisiana. And Betty Kaufman was there, and she was showing the pictures of a township that she worked with, and how the color of the water was just as black as mud, and how she had helped empower those people go to the Louisiana legislature and get a new water system, because naturally the community right next door that was of a different diversity had clean water, and the place where these people lived had very bad water, and you wouldn't drink it. And the thing that she said they did was they went to the presentation and they poured a glass of water for each one of the legislators and said, "This is the water that's at," and I believe it was St. Joseph's, "and would you like to drink this? Because this is what these people are drinking and bathing in and brushing their teeth in." And that just blew me out of the water. I think there were some other presentations, but that one was the one that impacted me more than anything, when I realized that people weren't just feeding the hungry. They were trying to change the underlying reasons for the social justice that we needed to do. And I knew it was more than just offering charity, that it was about offering justice and equity. And that really excited me. It was the thing I had been looking for, I think, all my life.
So nothing wrong with emergency help, but you were looking at systemic change.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that was really, it sounds like that one moment really captures your call.
It does, because I didn't exactly know what population I was going to serve. Now, because I'm gay, I figured that God was calling me into ministry to advocate for LGBTQIA+.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had I wasn't in a relationship, hadn't been in a relationship, but when everything turned over in 2014, I mean, it was just so fast. It just happened almost overnight. And here I am getting ordained, and there's absolutely nothing left for me to advocate for because it was already legal. And so, wow, that was just huge. So I just waited then for God to give me some direction, and that's when this journey with the homeless began.
Yeah, I want to get into that. Of course, that we're going to talk a lot about that, but I want to, before we do that, you've got a very interesting schedule on Sundays. So we were just talking a little bit about this before we came on, about how you're an organist and currently in 3 different churches, plus the church that you're assigned to as an Episcopal deacon. You're really the primary clergy, right?
I'm the deacon in charge. They don't like to use that, but I'm responsible for getting the supply priests and making sure that the vestry meetings happen and that we have a budget and that kind of thing. And it's a very small church, but when I was assigned to it, it had 4 people left in it. And now I wish they would all come at the same time, but there's 27 people on the rolls, and we get an average attendance of about 15. So it's absolutely lovely, the turnaround, and a little church, parish church, has been basically turned around completely. And I don't credit it with anything I did. I just credit it with adding some music. You know, a rural church oftentimes won't have music. And so, yes, I think some good things have happened since I've been there.
Let's give a word of encouragement to other deacons out there who are in very small parishes and are feeling strained. They are stretched, and give a word of encouragement and advice to those deacons, Connie.
Well, for one thing, it's about relationship, isn't it? And I think the other thing that we neglect when we get to a small parish is we need to find what is going to be the thing that our parish can do, that the need that isn't being met in the community. And for my parish, since it was very weak and very small and elderly initially, we wanted to find something that would not tax the membership, but would begin to do the process of outreach. And I wouldn't say that we have really a real vibrant outreach yet, but we at least know that we, like, for instance, I do Ashes to Go now out on the main street on Ash Wednesday. And we have a collection one time a year for a food bank. And then we prepare little bags for inmates at the detention center for people when they're being discharged. And then we have a festival in Manhattan. It's called the Potato Festival. And lots of people come. There's thousands of people that come to the Potato Festival, and everybody tries to get a little stand downtown. And I said, we'll just be swallowed up. So what we do is we set up a tent, and then we serve coffee and donuts to the people who are parking cars because they don't allow any cars downtown. So these are all things that don't require us to be out there 24/7 or even one day a week, but is something that we look forward to being able to do. And I'll just say, as far as the music goes, if you don't have music in your rural church, which many would not, there's a wonderful group called Music That Makes Community. Music Makes Community. And it's about paperless music and about just using our voices. And it's lovely, and it's something that I've incorporated and want to incorporate more. So it's possible to have music even with without all of the running tapes and audio visual equipment, just using the voices that God's given us to act as percussion instruments and to sing tunes that are easy to learn and not out of our ranges, especially our older ranges of voice.
Right. Wow. Great work there. Now, we want to talk about the work you're doing for those individuals in your area, in the Bozeman area, I guess, right, that are homeless.
Mhm.
Before we get into the specifics of that, let's talk about the particular issues that homeless individuals in Montana face. I mean, obviously, cold winters are one of those, but just talk about the need.
Well, it isn't just cold. It's snow on the ground 7 months out of the year. It may go away a little bit, but we have snow that stays, and it's not going to go away until I think there's some record somewhere that says in all the recorded time in Montana when they've been keeping data, there's only one day in the entire year when it hasn't ever snowed on that day. So we can have snow anytime. And it may go away in a few hours, but it is snowing right now.
Yeah.
So snow is a problem. And so when you're on a sleeping bag or something like that, just finding a dry place that is safe, that's an issue. So it isn't just cold, but when you're sleeping outdoors, you end up being challenged medically. You go into a survival mode. I think anybody that's having to live outdoors is in a survival mode, and you have to think of those people as really suffering from PTSD. Really, there's trauma involved when you're trying to stay alive and you're trying to not be frozen by morning, and you are trying to get your medications taken care of. And if you're a woman, you're trying to not be accosted in the night, and you're trying to keep all your belongings around you and not have someone steal them. So there's just this constant moving from one place to the next place that is extremely debilitating to people. Lots of physical problems, emotional problems, mental health issues. And I would just say I have learned in my work that there are really two classes of homeless people. There's what we call the transitionally homeless. Those are people who are probably homeless for a short term. And it's usually due to a medical bill, unexpected, or perhaps the relationship that we're in has broken up, or maybe they lost their job. And as we know, most people live from month to month. They don't really have a plan for, if I lose my job, what will I do for 3 months to pay the rent? And so they get evicted. And that causes some homelessness. Well, usually those people can actually be helped by just simply having a warming shelter where they can come and be there for a month, 2 months, but they still have a job and they're working and they can recover from their illness or get back on track. And they can be rehoused fairly, I wouldn't say easily, but they're likely 70% of those people are likely to be rehoused within 3 to 4 months. The chronically homeless, those are the ones that are most in danger of dying on the street. They, for whatever reason, do not fit into the category of normal, well, let's just give them an apartment or let's put them up in a hotel, or they are suffering from some other issues that for whatever reason have made them almost unhousable, if you will. There's almost no repair that can be done because the damage has been significant. So generally that you get to that place if you are on the street for a year or 2 years or off and on for 23 years, whatever, you find that those people tend to suffer more from not having a job, from more mental health issues, more substance abuse issues, and generally poor health because they haven't been able to take care of their blood pressure or whatever, their diabetes. And so the health goes down badly. So that is about 30% of our homeless here in this area are the ones who are chronically homeless. And that's what we hoped to try and deal with, that emergent problem. It was definitely an emergency.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So you were involved in can I say the mother of the Housing First Village? I know you're not going to call that, use that term for yourself.
I would say I had the spark. Let's just say the spark. I had the spark.
Okay.
But even I didn't have the spark. It came when I just received a picture from a friend of mine, and all it was just a little 98 square foot house, looked like a little house with a door that was on a single axle trailer. It was something that was being built in Detroit during the occupied Detroit period. Mm-hmm. And I took one look at it and thought, oh my gosh, that would be perfect here. It would give somebody protection. You know, when you think of housing first, you're not thinking of luxury or anything. You're simply trying to, how can I find a place that will be warm and dry, that a person can be safe in. The bathroom thing came later, but that was the first idea. That little 98 square foot house did not have a bathroom. It didn't have running water. It had some electricity if you could plug in somewhere, but it was definitely the beginning of the idea. And that's what started me off on the track, because then I thought, well, shoot, we have a back, we've got a back parking lot here. I bet you we could fit 4 of those in our back parking lot at the church. And I found out right away that that kind of thing was not going to be allowed. So then we own a property across the street. And I said, well, how about if we took that property and we put 4 of them there? And again, those were just ideas as they were starting to come. And all of those things kind of got talked through, and people, we ended up inviting the stakeholders, the people who actually needed a tiny house. What would you want in a tiny house? What would you need? It wasn't a matter of want. It was what would you need? And that's where the story really started to get interesting. Because it wasn't my idea, it was their idea. This was what they said as homeless people. This is what we feel we need in order to maybe begin to reintegrate with the community, maybe be able to recover, but not any expectation about that.
Right. You know, what you're talking about is good old asset-based community development. That's a fancy way of saying just asking people what it is they need, right? Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I love about what you said, and it seems like all deacons seem to have this in common, is they're always asking questions about why can't we do this? And sometimes those questions can be a little bit annoying to people, right?
Well, you're right. There were several things that kind of happened that really put me in passionate mode. And one of them was, we had this transitional house that housed 16 men and 8 women. And it was for transitionally homeless people. So they already had jobs, they were headed back. But something happened to the plumbing, and it was going to cost like $50,000 to fix the sewer. And nobody had the money to do it. And all of those people got evicted. Now, 24 doesn't sound like a big thing, but for me, it just set me over the edge. It was like, doggone it, we can't even hold on to what we've already got in place.
Mm.
And there has to be a better solution. Now, I never really entered into the transitionally homeless. There's all kinds of projects, from the emergency shelter to clear up to first-time home buying. But what it did was it forced me to go to the city and find out what kind of codes we did have, what would be allowable. What was there anything that allowed for a tiny house as I was envisioning it? And it turned out there actually really wasn't, although, God be praised, they were in the process of revising their codes. And so they said, you should start going to some of these meetings and begin to give some testimony. Mm-hmm. And I started attending these advisory council meetings and started talking about this idea of tiny houses and what it would look like. And instantly people saw that as a potential. We went through a lot of iterations of what it might look like. Initially, I had this idea that we could really get the job done if we could lease city land, because I knew that any city has got property that they haven't developed, and maybe they're not going to develop it for another 50 or even 100 years, especially like if it's on the cemetery property, or maybe it's out in the country, or maybe it's an unregistered area within the city limits that isn't actually part of the city limits. I found out a lot about floodplains and landfills and, what's it, that there's all these little pockets of pieces of land that the city owns that they haven't developed, and they're not planning on doing anything with it at the time. So, I mean, we went around and looked at all of those little areas and said, well, we could put 5 houses here. Well, we could put 20 houses here. And so it was a process of trying to find the right place. But my original idea was that we would lease the land for $1 a year and make them houses portable so they could be picked up and moved. If you're doing something that is no wider than 8 feet, which is what you can put on the back of a semi-trailer and haul somewhere, then you could pick it up, put it on that, and move it to someplace else. Well, just because land is so expensive, that just seemed like we could really keep the cost down. It would just there'd be no infrastructure. You just simply would have to get the boards and the nails and the sheetrock, and voila, you'd have a little house and a toilet and a sink, and then you'd be done. But as it turned out, we had to buy some land. and we had to buy land on the other side of the tracks, which even though people get really excited about something like this, nobody wants it in their backyard. Mm-hmm. So the NIMBYA problem raised its ugly head, but we just kept looking until we found a couple of places that was not in anybody's backyard and butted right up against the railroad tracks. And so there you go. It was suddenly doable, but it also increased the cost. So I can tell you about all of that.
Yeah. Now you had some early success in folks hearing your story, hearing your vision, and coming to you and saying, I want to support you financially.
Absolutely. That was probably the thing that, when people put their money where their mouth is, then something's in it, and you just keep following that. But the first time that I actually spoke about it in church, I just kind of threw the idea out, like, I'm thinking about a tiny house. And wouldn't that be wonderful? I mean, after all, we just built a $5 million animal shelter, and we don't have anything for people, but we spent $5 million on an animal shelter. Mm. and really, is there something the matter with our priorities here? And after church, I mean, this guy came from the back of the church, almost running up, and said to me, if you do this, I can guarantee you $20,000 in 5 minutes. Now, I thought that was pretty awesome. I thought, hey, I could build 2 houses for that. So I was ready to go. And it was born out of his desire to help a son of his that was homeless. But so the need, that what was driving him was, I'll get behind this because I know someone. Well, then I went to kind of a community meeting at our local cafe. We have a cafe that's open every day of the year in the evening for 2 hours. It's a pay as you can. In other words, it's anyone from the community can come. There's no questions asked. We have a culinary school that cooks, and the food bank provides the food, and they have an old restaurant that's been refurbished, and they cook a really great meal every night. And then all of the churches serve. It's called the Fork and Spoon, and we all volunteer 1 day a month to come in and be the servers and the cleaner-uppers. We don't have to cook the food, but we serve anybody that comes in. So we were having a meeting at this cafe, and I was just sharing with people about the idea, and a lady literally brought me a $10,000 check and said, I want to be part of this effort. And I mean, I'm sitting there with $10,000, and I'm just going, okay, this is really taking off. And it happened more than one time, John. I'd have people call me over to their home and say, I don't live here. I live in Vermont, but I really believe in this. And one lady gave me $12,500. I mean, then my idea was originally to go to churches and say, okay, there's 30 churches here. If every church supported one house, because originally we kind of thought the cost would be $10,000 per house. And that was working with the university. By that time, the university had a class that was investigating all different kinds of models, and we were all fired up, and we were having an open house for the community. Part of the work that the students did was we really for a whole semester talked through all the potential designs. What's the best design for Montana? And the only thing that I really insisted on was there has to be a bathroom. We can't go the cheap route and just go with a bank of porta potties, against the wall, because I said, as a woman, I don't want to be stepping out of now as a woman that's 71, I don't want to get up in the middle of the night and have to go to a bank of porta potties or some community's bathroom. I want a place that I'm safe in and can be in my own little house. And of course, that makes the cost a great deal more when you have water, because then you have to deal with the wastewater, and you have to anyway, it increases the cost quite a bit. It doubles it. So we would have open houses for the community, and the kids would build their design life-size model out of cardboard. And then you could come from the community, and they'd have this huge gymnasium where there'd be like 10 different designs. And you could come in, and as a community member, you could get the idea of, well, this isn't really very big, 150 square feet. And we put little little models out at the mall where people could look at all the different designs. I mean, because they were trying different architectural designs, L-shaped, rectangular, box, tall, short, lots of windows, not very many windows, just all kinds of ideas to see what was actually going to work the best for Montana here. And we actually ended up coming up with 5 different designs that are all about 150 square feet. and one design that is ADA compatible. So it's about 300 square feet, but a person in a wheelchair can actually get on both sides of the bed, get into the bathroom that's completely water, and can be in the living area with a wheelchair. So that was, we have two of those ADA compatible houses.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that struck me about this initiative, this work that you're doing with Housing First Village, is that you brought together a group of students, faculty, academics from Montana State University, your church community, and the Human Resource Development Council in Bozeman, that I assume is a government agency, right?
Well,
So
it's actually, it gets federal money, but it's
okay.
it is actually not a government agency.
Okay.
No.
Okay. But a disparate organization than the other two. So you were bringing all these different constituencies to the table that otherwise would not have been at the same table, but were all interested in the same problem.
Right.
Talk about how you did that.
Again, I just have to say it was God, because when I went to the city manager to talk to him, and he told me that he didn't give me a red light, but he didn't give me a green light either. It kind of was a little bit of a yellow light. He's the one that said, you should go to these meetings, and well, we're modifying our codes now. But I left his office when the meeting was over, and I was headed out to the parking lot when he sends this young page after me and says, you need to come back. There's somebody you should meet that's in his office. And I went back, and it turned out to be a university professor who was with the architecture department, who was also there with a great interest. He had some graduate students that wanted to work on something like this. And we instantly connected and clicked. And I said, well, I want to work on this. And he said, well, I'm going to make a class. And this was like in July. And by August, he had a class in the university, and 12 students had registered for it that
Wow.
were going to work on this problem. And I was intimately involved in that. I mean, they had some videos where I'm sawing wood, and, we're trying to set a wall up. And I mean, it was amazing that first semester. The enthusiasm and excitement was just palpable. And when we started to get money, a church and a state institution, they can't have a contract together because of the separation of church and state. That's when I said, we need somebody else who can handle all the money that's a 501c3. And that's when we brought HRDC to the table, because they were already working with homeless people. They just were struggling to even get a shelter. We didn't even have a shelter here that was open more than 5 months out of the year. It opened on November 1 and closed on March 31. And so they had no capacity to deal for the chronically homeless. They were just struggling. It could only hold 40 people, and they were paying an astronomical amount of money to rent an old warehouse. And we started getting a few things in there like showers. And I mean, if you're homeless and you don't get a shower or get your clothes washed, you're never going to get a job. Mm-hmm. And so we had a food program going. We started a shower program in this warming shelter, all while we were just trying to meet the need of the people who were right there and then, because we knew this other project was going to be some time off the ground. I kind of thought unrealistically it might be we could get something going in a year. It actually was 5 years before we actually opened the first house. But when it opened, it was right, and we were ready for it, and we had the infrastructure, because you have to talk about what is the case management going to be, and who's going to manage that, and who's going to have fiduciary responsibility, all of these, and then the rules. I had a lot of people say to me, well, are you going to allow them to smoke in those tiny houses? So I said, well, can you smoke in your house? Well, why couldn't they smoke in their house? Well, what about pets? It was just, we basically came down to, if they're not breaking the law, they can do whatever you would do in your house.
Mm.
And we kept the model that it was going to be, you get a house and there's nothing you have to do for it. You don't have to agree to become a Christian. You don't have to agree to enter a treatment program. You don't have to agree to not have a pet. You just get a house.
Mm.
And that's the heartbreaking thing about it, John. Most of the people that get the house, they're not going to live very long, because they've been so traumatized by being outdoors for so long. And we've had the houses open now for a year, and we're not done building. We have 12 that are finished and 7 more that'll be finished in the spring. And not one single person that's moved in has returned to homelessness. And 2 people have actually died. But the miracle is, they didn't die outside, frozen to death.
Right.
They died in their house, their home. I mean, I call that a major victory, because in 2020, every year, Roxy and I do the memorial on December 21st, the longest night of the year. We do a memorial for all of the homeless people that have died in the past year. And in 2020, there were 8 people that froze to death. It's just heartbreaking. But when you share that with people, and they don't even get into the paper, because nobody knows them,
Right.
except we know them. So I don't think we didn't have anybody freeze last year, and for 2 of them to die in their home, that to me is just huge, a huge win, with dignity. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I was going to use that word. I mean, and this is true for all deacons that are working to fight homelessness and poverty. It's not just about the housing, although it is. It's not just about food, although it is. It's about a return of dignity. And that's what you're talking about.
I wish that just that moral issue alone of giving people dignity was enough to motivate. But we had to do a lot of other hard work. We had to actually show that financially, this was a much better response to homelessness. And what HRDC had already done before I ever came on the scene was, they had actually spent 2 years trying to estimate the cost of homelessness, which there's national numbers, there's federal numbers about the cost of homelessness. And if you look it up, I haven't looked in the last year or so, but it's about $44,000 a year per homeless person. And why is that? Well, because they end up using the emergency room. They end up being in the detention centers or the jails because they commit a misdemeanor in order to get into, 3 hots and a cot, really. Sometimes that's the only thing that can save them, is to get a misdemeanor and go to jail for a month during the worst of the weather. Or they Like here in Bozeman, we have a public library that's very nice, and anyone can go to the public library in the day. And that seemed to kind of be an area that the homeless were congregating because it was a warm place. There were seats, they could read. There was a bathroom that they could use, and there was even a little coffee shop downstairs. But it made the patrons a little nervous. So the city ended up hiring a full-time police officer that would be in the library during the day. It wasn't because the homeless were doing anything, but it alleviated some concern on the part of families and little children. And anyway, but those all add to the cost of what homelessness costs your taxpayers. They get ambulance rides, they can't pay for it. They go to the hospital, they can't pay for it. They end up having to be transported to a mental health facility, which we didn't have any psychiatric care here in Bozeman, which is an area that we're trying to get that fixed. But 44,000, and actually our figure was a little lower than that. It was $29,000 a year that it was costing the taxpayer. And then they took a few of the people that they'd been following for the 2 years, and they only changed one thing. They put them in housing. They didn't get out. They didn't get jobs. They didn't get alcohol and drug service. They didn't go in rehabilitation. Nothing else changed except they went into housing first. And that cost dropped to, are you ready?
Yes.
$11,700.
Wow.
From $29,000 to $11,700, just simply giving housing where they could close a door, feel secure, have a bed they could lie on, be warm at night, take a shower, and possibly go ring bells for the Salvation Army or something, you know? So it was revolutionary to discover that anybody could get behind this project, whether you were a conservative or a liberal, not because of the moral issue, but it would save money. And that's too bad. But that was a big card that we played a lot, was this will save you money as taxpayers. And it will get, the dignity piece wasn't nearly as moving, sadly enough. But for those of us that really matters to, you know, you play whatever card you have to in order to get people behind your idea. And so people got behind the idea. And before I knew it, I had churches that were, one church just shocked the heck out of me. The pastor asked, could we do one house for $12,000? That's when everybody still thought it cost $12,000. But they said, let's try and raise $12,000. And they raised $66,000, just one church.
Oh, wow.
Because one person said, if you raise $12,000, I'll match it with $12,000. And then another person said, well, I'll match another $12,000. It was just phenomenal. It was terrific. And then I had little groups of women that would be like sewing and knitting things. And they'd say, well, we can't give you $12,000 in one bunch, but can we give you $2,500 twice a year? Because they'd have these little craft fairs, and then they'd sell all these things, and then they'd bring a check for 20. We want to buy one house, and they'd do it over 2 years, you know? So it was just amazing how people got behind it. And it wasn't just the Christian community, it was the interfaith community that wanted to come along beside us. And there were plenty of other people. I mean, there are a lot of people that gave hugely into this that don't have any affiliation with church whatsoever. Wonderful, kind-hearted people who, I'll just tell one story, and that was one of the biggest donors. is separated or divorced from her husband, and both of them have considerable resources. And she said to him, I'm supporting this project and I'm going to give $2 million to it. Will you match it? And he did. And that was the beginning of our $15 million capital campaign, which has now reached $14.5 million. We're very close to finishing the capital campaign. And when we finish it, what we will have at the end is not just tiny houses for those who are chronically homeless. We'll have a shelter that will house 300 people that will be for the transitionally homeless. That cafe will be inside of that. We are enlarging the food bank, increasing it by 3 times the amount. There'll be community gardens. There'll be a clinic on site. All of the services that the homeless need will be at this Housing First Village. Instead of them having to go out to find alcohol and drug or job service or physical care, mental health care, any of those things, they'll all be on site. And so it's wonderful. It went way beyond the initial spark of a little 98 square foot house into something that is going to serve a lot of people over a lot of time. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, wow. Connie, I think it would be great for our listeners and selfishly me. I'd love to hear you tell us a story of maybe that represents a parable of this ministry. Something that's happened along the way that has illustrated where God shows up in this ministry and in this calling of yours.
Well, I took my my inspiration from 2 homeless men, one of whom has died alone in a car that was not working. He was living in this car that didn't go anywhere. But the other one, I'm not sure where he is now but initially when I talked with him, he was really my motivation behind it, because I saw in him someone who really wanted to do something and was not capable of changing some things. He had a basic high school education, and he was a truck driver. He had a CDL. And he had a home, actually, but his home burned down. And when it burned down, he didn't have insurance. But he said to himself, I can live on the street and just keep working as a truck driver, and I'll be able to get that back, get a home again. And so he started just roughing it. He had a bicycle and he had a sleeping bag, and he was tough. But what happened was, the next time he went to apply to get his CDL renewed, they wouldn't renew it because sleeping on the ground, his blood pressure had started to go up, and he couldn't get the blood pressure to come down. And even though he worked every day, he didn't actually he wasn't doing the kind of work that he was trained for, but he would go to the Job Express every day, and they'd send him out to ring bells or go to a construction site or do something that wherever he could get to on his bicycle. And he was on our task force. He was one of the stakeholders because he didn't have some of the mental health issues that some do. He was really a hard worker. He was committed. I thought, if there's anybody that could succeed, be in a tiny home and then transition into a normal home, it would be him. He's left the community. I'm not sure where he is. I think what happened was he turned 65. And when he did that, he started to collect a little bit of a Social Security check. He said, I can retire now. So he went south, but he was always kind of the one that I would look for him and say, how you doing? And let's have some coffee and let's talk about how things are going. He was one that I wanted to be first on the list to get into one of the tiny houses because I thought he will succeed. Mm. But if you want another story, some of the other stories are more, it's people learning to resolve conflict. This little group of houses now are in community. And recently they told me a story of a new person who moved into the tiny house, and all the other residents had gotten a card, signed it, and welcomed her. And one of them brought a little plant. And so she put that in her window. And later that weekend, they had a barbecue for her, because in the community that they've built, there's a barbecue and there's some picnic tables out there. And you can put curtains in your little house, or you can put plants. One person is hanging Christmas lights for the first time ever. She's never had a home where she could put Christmas lights. They can have a pet. But it's learning how to say I'm sorry when they have a conflict, something that a lot of them have never done before, or learning how to live together and resolve the conflicts that they have between themselves, things that would normally have maybe set them on a tear before and maybe even cause them to be evicted. These are things that they're safe and they're learning to deal with some of these things. Those are all beautiful stories for me, is that they're returning to community and returning to being involved with other people. They're not isolating, they're not hiding, they are not ashamed.
Beautiful stories for us as well. So thank you, Connie. And you're busy and I've got to let you go. But as we wind down here, before we leave, I want to make sure we talk about your participation in AED, the Association of Episcopal Deacons. You're a member.
Yes.
Why is it important for you to be a member of AED, and how does AED help you in this work you do?
Well, for one thing, being in AED, like I said, I finally, for the first time in my life, saw what a real deacon was when I attended the triennium in Chicago. And since then, I have been to every triennium. And I loved it when we were in Minneapolis and we spontaneously had a rally in front of the cathedral to protest the violence that was happening. And I remember someone was at that conference and they were selling stoles, and they told deacon stoles, and they said, the color orange is not a liturgical color, but if you want to, without using words, say how much you disapprove of violence, get a stole that's got orange in it. And I remember buying a red stole that I'm going to be wearing later tomorrow, because we're having an ordination for 2 vocational deacons in Billings. And it's going to have orange and red in it, because I'm saying I protest violence. And this is how I'm going to do it, by wearing these colors. But I never would have known that without being with other deacons and hearing their stories, and meeting people like Betty Kaufman or Louise Thibodeau or Carol Maddox or Lori Mills Kern. Those people have been my heroes. And I have learned so much. We have a school for deacons in Montana, and I go to the conferences for the directors and archdeacons, because that's where we've learned everything that we needed to put our school together. But I think as an organization, people like Mary Kate Wold have really gone to bat for us, because we've been willing to say we need to be protected. And this is something that's, I really believe has been important, that the church pension fund needed to be aware of who we were. And that would have only happened with the the AED, the Association for Episcopal Deacons. And we've got a great executive director now in Carter Hawley, and some amazing people that have really fought hard for the diaconate. And I'm thankful to be part of that wave of deacons that is really continuing to blaze forward. So I think all deacons should be members, and we do some amazing things together.
Amen and hallelujah. Deacon Connie Campbell-Pearson, wow, you're awesome. You are an inspiration to all of us of any vintage in the diaconate. You're an inspiration, and I think I speak on behalf of all our listeners that we appreciate you and your work very much. And before we let you go, though, I'd like to ask if folks that want to know more can get in touch, and if they can, how they can contact you.
Right, they can. And we designed the project so that the architectural designs, I think I could share those designs. There are 5 different designs, but I certainly would share any of the work and what we did to actually create the houses, because I think we wanted to make it so it could be replicated anywhere in the United States. Every house is about 150 square feet with a 36-inch shower, a toilet, a sink with a kind of a little kitchen area. We don't call it a kitchen, but it's got a little infrared stove, not stove. There's no stove. There's a microwave, but then there's like a 2-burner hot plate and a refrigerator, and then a place for a single bed and maybe a closet, just depending on the style. But I'd be happy to share those. My email is Campbell, like soup, CAMPBELL .Connie, CONNIE 54 @gmail. And you can contact me, and I would love to talk to you about how you could start a project like this in your community.
Be careful if you call or email her, folks, because her enthusiasm is contagious. Deacon Connie Campbell-Pearson, we're grateful for you, and we thank God for you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless you. And folks, just before we let you go, just a reminder that this series, Advancing the Diaconate, is a joint endeavor of the Association for Episcopal Deacons, AED, and the Fund for the Diaconate. This series is devoted to highlighting the work of deacons like Connie and their ministries in the world and in the church. It's also part of a fundraising campaign to support deacons in that work. If you'd like to learn more on how to support deacons and those that they serve, go to episcopaldeacons.org, that's the site of AED, or email campaign@episcopaldeacons.org, and you can find the Fund for the Diaconate site at fundfordiaconate.org. So for Deacon Connie Campbell-Pearson, I'm Deacon John Ray. Join us next time for another edition of Advancing the Diaconate.
Thank you for joining us on Advancing the Diaconate. This series is a joint production of the Association for Episcopal Deacons and the Fund for the Diaconate, who support deacons in their ministries today and tomorrow. Join them and add your support for deacons.